Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammang sangham namasami. Dear friends, this is the regular Sunday Sutta Study program at Dhammadharini. We have been examining the 7 factors of awakening, or the 7 bojjhangas, and the sutta that I chose for today is relevant to the last factor, the factor of equanimity, or upekkha. Before I begin to read you the sutta, I want to just make a few very brief general comments about upekkha, or equanimity. We may speak further about this perhaps on Tuesday of this week coming. Upekkha comes up in many different contexts within the teachings. It's a very central concept. In fact, if you think of the middle way, which was the very first thing that the Buddha spoke of, I speak of the middle way, in between sensual indulgence and self-torture. So upekkha, as it relates to neutrality, not favoring or disfavoring either extreme, is a kind of an expression of the middle way. Upekkha is one of the divine abidings. Those would be loving friendliness or loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Equanimity is different than the other 3. The first 3 of the divine abidings are based on an aspiration. May all beings be well or happy. May those who are suffering be free from suffering. May those who are experiencing success not lose what they gained. Equanimity is just a recognition of the way in which all beings are the same. So when we're practicing the divine abiding of equanimity, we may be reflecting all beings are the owners of their karma and inherit its results. So instead of focusing on the diversity or differences among beings, we reframe our mind to focus on what's the same. And in that way, in that way, the mind can become stable and not reactive. As a bojjhanga, or one of the factors of awakening, upekkha helps the mind to keep balance, to be on an even keel, so that whatever arises within the mind, especially in meditation, is observed in a calm way without becoming either fascinated or terrified, and then being able to see things as they really are. So in that way, upekkha is very close to wisdom, because it's got that clarity which is able to make it possible to see things as they are. In a relationship to energy, upekkha is helping us to be neither too relaxed or too uptight, finding the sweet spot in terms of our energy, which is steady, calm, not erratic, not stressful, but also not falling into being slack or sleepy. In terms of the sankharas, there's a stage of insight meditation that's given in the Visuddhimagga, which is equanimity with respect to formations, or equanimity with respect to conditioned things or the factors of the mind. And in that case, it's a state which is able to calmly observe the activities of the mind. And again, this is a very high state, the highest that one can reach through striving. It said, upekkha, all of the ones that I've mentioned so far are what would be called a sankhara, or a mental formation. But upekkha also can refer to a feeling, a vedana. So a vedana is the result of previous karma. A sankhara is something which is creating a karma. It's a mental action which is creating a karma. As a feeling, upekkha is referring to neutral feeling, or neither pleasant nor painful feeling. And it's not by itself either skillful or advanced, but it creates the opportunity or the occasion to learn how to be present, awake, and to notice and see the neutral feeling. Since it's not naturally that noticeable compared with strong, pleasant or unpleasant feelings are much more memorable. A neutral feeling is kind of forgettable, but with mindfulness we train ourselves to pay equal attention. And then in the experience of samadhi within the jhanas, the joy and bliss of the first jhana, the happiness of the earlier jhanas gradually drops away and is replaced by a very deep, profound neutrality. The mind goes to a neutral place where it's not experiencing pleasant and unpleasant physical feelings, nor pleasant or unpleasant painful feelings. And that neutral feeling helps to make the sankhara of upekkha to be more brilliant and more clear. So there's another term about upekkha which we see in the Abhidhamma. It's called tatra majjhatata. Tatra majjhatata. That is being in the middle. It's a very beautiful synonym for upekkha, the mind for the development of deep insight, having this calm, steady state which is able to have that stability in the middle of all the things that are happening. So all the experiences, it's like awareness is the man who's standing in the middle of the Ferris wheel, he's standing on the ground, and then the machine of the Ferris wheel is going around and around, and the different, horses or the different animals on the Ferris wheel keep going by, keep going by, keep going by, and that's like the different experiences that we have are constantly going by and constantly moving. But then there's an impression of something, a center point, which has got a certain kind of stability. That's that tatra majjhatata. So those are just some general descriptions of what how upekkha appears in different contexts. Now I'm going to open to the analysis of the 6 sense fields, which is number 137 in the middle length discourses. If you have the book by Wisdom Publications with Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, it's on page 1066. And I am going to again share a screen with you, which will be an outline. So I'm going to point to where we are in the outline while we hear what's in the sutta. I hope that will make it useful to everyone. Is that big enough for anybody to be able to see on the screen? You want it to be bigger? Okay.
That's great.
So this is the outline of the sutta at the first point. First, it's giving a summary of things that should be understood. And when it's the word that's translated as understood is veditaba, which is veditiyati. So it means to, as a verb, it means to experience, and the related noun is feeling. And I think that they must have used this verb for understanding, because the sutta later on gets involved with different kinds of feeling. Then he describes the 6 interior sense fields, the exterior sense fields, the classes of consciousness, the classes of contact. These are, we see these in many different places. Then the Buddha describes 18 mental preoccupations and 36 positions of sentient beings. So this section about the mental preoccupations and what's called the positions of sentient beings is I think for us, will be the most interesting part of the sutta. And then the end of the sutta is how to practice with it. That is how to develop upekkha.
Excuse me, Ayya, pardon me. A few people are not muted. If you just remind people to mute while you're talking.
Okay, if you are not muted, if you could mute yourself. And thank you.
Excuse me, it's Maureen. I'm going to go and get my copy. Okay.
Okay, very good. Relying on this, give up that. Levels of equanimity and 8 directions. These are the last 3 bullet points. And I'm laying these out at the beginning so that you won't be lost when we come there later on. Now, I'm going to read to you about the 6, about the things that should be understood. The Buddha was saying at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove and Atapindika's monastery, then he's addressed the bhikkhus. Bhikkhus, he said, Venerable Sir, they replied, and the Buddha said this, Bhikkhus, I shall teach you the analysis of the 6 sense fields. Listen and apply your mind well. I will speak. So he's not giving any preamble or any special problem. He's just jumping right into this fundamental Dhamma. Then he goes through the outline about the interior sense fields, the exterior sense fields, and so on. So the interior sense fields are the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. The exterior sense fields are the corresponding types of objects. The sights, the visible sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, the touches, and the thoughts. The 6 classes of consciousness, this is vijnana. This is the faculty which is able to cognize something, or in some cases you could say which inclines towards cognizing a particular kind of object. So the eye consciousness is the mental faculty that's capable of cognizing a visible object by way of the seeing faculty. Likewise, the consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, body, and mind consciousness, they are capable of cognizing their own particular type of object. The mind consciousness is capable to integrate the idea or the thought that's arising from a visible object or another kind of a sense base. And as well, the mind consciousness is able to call up something like a memory or an imagination where there's not necessarily a visible object in front of you. There's nothing necessarily happening in your physical eyeball, but you could remember or imagine blue sky, and you could experience with the mind blue. Or you could experience an idea that doesn't necessarily correspond to a simple aspect of another senses. So you could cognize justice, which is a more complicated idea. The contact, when there is an internal sense faculty, like the seeing faculty, a corresponding external object, and a corresponding consciousness capable of cognizing that, and those 3 things come together with that triple conjunction, there is the contact. And it's said in dependent origination that depending on contact, there arises a Vedana, or feeling. Especially in this sutta, the way they're referring to knowing with the verb Vediyati, so that with the Vediyati is arising Vedana, it's like before anything conceptual or any perception is formed, or before any concept is formed, before any intention is formed, the very initial first nonverbal experience is to be experienced in terms of Vedana. So this is sort of setting the groundwork. And if you were studying this sutta on a meditation retreat, you might spend a day or more than a day, you could spend a month just attuning yourself to notice seeing, notice hearing, notice touching. See if you can, it's sort of like a soup, you might not be able to separate the arising of a visual object and the seeing faculty, but they're part of the mix, and you can develop that capacity to recognize those things within your own experience when you're practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness and you're doing the meditation on the ayatanas. Now, when we come to the 18 mental preoccupations, now we are starting to come into the realm of dukkha and how the natural pattern for a sentient being is to experiencing things in a way which can give rise to dukkha. So, seeing a sight with the eye, one is preoccupied with a sight that is the basis for happiness or sadness or equanimity. So a beautiful, pleasant sight is the basis for happiness. An ugly, disgusting sight is the basis for sadness, or a neutral sight is the basis for equanimity. And likewise with each one of the faculties, especially when the last one is translated as becoming conscious of a thought with the mind. One becomes preoccupied with a thought. That's the basis for happiness. Or one becomes preoccupied with a thought. That's the basis for sadness. Or one is preoccupied with a thought. That's the basis for equanimity. I want to pause here for a second and see if somebody can criticize this Dhamma by pointing out that one particular object could be the basis for pleasure in the morning, and then in the afternoon it's the basis for sadness. And then in the evening it's the basis for equanimity. So whether a particular experience is creating those types of feeling responses will depend on how a person has been conditioned. Anybody have a doubt about that? Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. That goes to the mano vichara. It's because mano is connected with conceit. And the original idea of conceit, when these things were being translated, is imagination. It's not so much the Freudian idea, that comes in other parts of Buddhist teaching of, someone's conceited or something, although that's sort of an imagination too, but it really, and that's probably how it got identified with that word, really just imagination. So the object at various times, as your going towards it, and complete chara circling around it, right? Depending on your imagination, in the morning you're thinking, oh, that's so nice, but then maybe something happens in the meeting. Oh no, that's not good at all, right? And so it's that constant mana or mano changing all the time, and so your imagination is changing about the object constantly. Anyways, that's my view, but other people may have something else. Thank you.
Thank you. The example that I've heard is when somebody cuts you off in traffic. So if the conceit is feeling very like vulnerable, endangered, and frightened, if that's like the pattern of the mind, which is based on a self-view of being vulnerable, then you could be frightened or angry when somebody cuts you off. But then if the self-view is more secure, then it could just be a nothing. Or if you have been cultivating compassion, and the habit of the mind is very compassionate, and this is something that you've really developed greatly, then when somebody cuts you off, you would feel sorry for them, which would not be unpleasant necessarily to feel compassion. So I think it's very accurate what Richard is mentioning, that how these reactions are colored is very much affected by the last one of the bases, the mind base, and what the patterns are prevalent there.
Ayya,
Yeah,
it's
I'll go
more,
to.
more,
Let me, okay,
yeah.
I'll go to. Let me go take you in order. I'll take Ren, then Sheila, then Maureen.
Okay.
Ren.
Thank you, Ayya. It's a follow-up to your question and also Richard's answer. Because I was thinking when you explained 18 mental preoccupations, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, those are very physical specific, and mine is kind of more of a morphing monster sort of thing. So that was what I was thinking, that probably there are quite a lot of overlaps between what we pick up, let's say from the nose. Let's say we smell pastry or baked bread that seems to be pleasant, but then if the bread makes you think of your aunt who passed away, who used to bake bread all the time, and you associate that with sadness. That's the mind mental facility. So it sounds like there's overlap, there's interaction. So my question is that this 18 mental preoccupation, it doesn't mean that they have to be distinctly separate, right?
Well, the mind, there's an interaction between each of the five physical senses and the mind. And actually, can be a combination that the mind is synthesizing from several of the physical senses. So like, I might have a friend, and I know how they look, I know how they sound, and I know how they smell. And I guess I know how they feel if I pet them. So then all the five senses can be engaged, are integrated into the mind, and any fragment of any one of those things, all I need to do is to see their fingernail and I know who it is, and can recognize this whole bundle from one fragment. Let's remember about this idea of preoccupation. So if a person, depending on your character, if for some people their ideas or their thoughts seem more real than the sensory inputs, and for some people the sensory inputs seem to be more real and the thoughts seem to be less real. So if you are preoccupied with you could be preoccupied with a certain sensory object and be recurringly, grasping and thinking and remembering and coming back again and again to the actual object, or to like you can't stop watching. I guess something happened and you can't stop watching it, or something has made a strong impression and you can't stop remembering the visual look of that thing. Or you want to go back again and again to see that thing because that thing is so pleasing to you. Or you want to run away and never see that thing again because that thing is unpleasant. But whether running away or seeing, or even something neutral, if you're using a particular colored kasina as an object of meditation, that could be a neutral object, and you're staring at that object in order to support a neutral feeling, that could be a preoccupation. If that's all, Ren, I'll go on to Sheila.
Something that I'm surprised about was the how thought is part of the exterior field, but mind is an interior field. That seems to imply that thought is not generated from the mind. Thought comes from the outside. So that's what I'm surprised about.
Yes, it said that dhammas, which is translated here as thoughts, are the corresponding object. They're trying to set up the parallelism of the mental faculty with the physical sense faculty. So consciousness cognizes mental phenomena. Elsewhere, I see that word dhamma is translated as a phenomena. In this translation, they call it a thought. So taking the thoughts as being something external is a way of conditioning ourselves to recognize that we have freedom in relationship to our thoughts. So if a particular thought comes along, we can choose whether we want to keep thinking that thought or if we would like to stop thinking that thought. And we could choose that based on whether that thought is good for us or not. And that's one way. Or when you didn't know something, like if you didn't know about the Dhamma and you met a teacher and the teacher said, did you know all things are impermanent? Everything that arises passes away. And you never heard of that before, and then you heard of it and said, wow, what a great thought. That's very interesting. So the thought came from outside. And once it came from outside, then one was able to cognize it. Now, to stay in order, I'm going to go Sheila.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon, Ayya. When I think of preoccupation, the thought that comes up in principle is letting go of strong views. In many examples, that preoccupation, this is what I believe, and I'm going to hold on to that, whether it is pleasant or negative. And so just for me, reminding myself, whether it's in a conversation with someone or seeing something, whatever that cognizing is, remembering that the letting go of strong views either way.
Yes, that's correct. Preoccupation is the opposite of letting go. I want to go to stay in order. I'm going to go to Maureen. Do you still have a question or a comment?
I appreciate all the comments that have been made. I would have thought that, as a comment on that, I would have thought that concepts were also things that are around and your mind grasps them as an external object, But the thing is, I was thinking that this is about whether your mind is really tamed or untamed. And I imagine that eventually, if you're really tamed, then everything is in the neutral, equanimous way of viewing it, no matter what it is.
Thank you.
Okay.
The next bit that we're going to come to is about that process of taming the mind. Patipada, and I think you'll be the last one for this set of questions or comments.
Thank you, Ayya. The entire list that you've shared with us, it it seems to be our obsession with the past. So thinking happens, and the thinking happens taking all of our memories and experiences in the past and distilling it into an interpretation in the present moment. And so the practice, my understanding of the practice is that we see this and we just let it go. Then we focus our attention, our concentration on the present moment to be able to see things as they are. So the whole point of right view, my understanding is the whole point of right view is to take all of the things on this list and see them for what they are.
Mhm.
The past, like a jigsaw puzzle, we move those puzzle pieces around to create an image and a desire for the future, but it's all just memory. So in my practice, that's what I've come to understand about the process, that thoughts simply happen. I don't generate it. It just happens in the background. Even when I'm having a conversation, I observe it happening in the background as I'm trying to listen. So I've had to learn an awareness level of listening to be present with anyone I'm interacting with. So can you comment on this experience of mine, please?
Yes, it's true that training oneself to stay in the present moment is an alternative to being preoccupied, and that this preoccupation has a sense of clinging to some things that have already passed. The next section that we're going to get to is going to give another set of different ways to overcome preoccupation. Damon, I see a hand, and if you want to comment, but I want to stop after you, and so we can go on to the next section.
Oh, I was just piggybacking on Rachel's comment about the importance of staying in the present moment. But I had the question that even in the present moment, these same six senses are all we have to perceive with. And so on the one hand, it sounds like this sutta is going in the direction of sort of denigrating the senses as usual. But on the other hand, the senses are really even ultimate reality. Isn't it the case that even ultimate reality, the only way to perceive them is through the senses anyway?
Yes, I don't agree that it's denigrating. I think what the Buddha is setting forth is this is all you have to work with. There's nothing that can be known except what can be apprehended by means of the five physical senses and the mind. And but what he is setting up as a criticism is this preoccupation, being preoccupied with an object. So I think this will become clearer as we come into the next section of the sutta. So I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. Now we have a section that are, the way, this is Bhante Sujata's translation, and he says there are 36 positions of sentient beings. There are 6 kinds of householders' happiness and 6 kinds of renunciate happiness. There are 6 kinds of householders' sadness and 6 kinds of renunciate sadness, 6 kinds of householders' equanimity, and 6 kinds of renunciate equanimity. So let's take these 6 kinds of householders' happiness. And I think it is interesting that it's not talking about things, the whole sutta is focusing on things that are inherently lovely. And it says there are sights known by the eye that are likable, desirable, agreeing, pleasing, connected with the worldly pleasures of the flesh. Happiness arises when you regard it as a gain to obtain such sights, or when you recollect the sights you formerly obtained that have passed, ceased, and perished. So one can have the happiness to see what is beautiful and mine, or to remember when I was little, I saw something that was beautiful and mine, and I can enjoy that pleasure, that happiness. That's the householder's happiness. And then similarly for sounds, doesn't it happen with sounds, like if you could remember a line of poetry? Does anybody ever have a line of poetry come to mind that you learned a long time ago and it just, or a tune, a piece of music that you learned a long time ago and it comes up and it's happy to remember that. That's householder's happiness. And then it gives the 6 kinds of renunciate happiness. So this is the same kind of objects, the same beautiful sight or beautiful tune or beautiful smell or whatever it is, just exactly the same things. So the renunciate happiness is when you have understood the impermanence of the sights, their perishing, fading away, and cessation. And happiness arises as you truly understand through right understanding that both formerly and now all those sights are impermanent, suffering, and perishable. And then you feel so happy. That's renunciate happiness. If that, those of us who have contemplated impermanence, who have recognized how painful it is trying to hang on something that's impermanent, and realized the joy of the freedom that we can have to be present with the experiences even as they are impermanent. That it's not your possession, not something to keep, but just something that was experienced momentarily. Then you come to the sadness. The happiness is called somanasa. You might have probably heard of sukha and dukkha. Sukha is sometimes called pleasure or sometimes called happiness. And then dukkha is sometimes called pain and sometimes called suffering. So if it's being presented in terms of there's sukha, dukkha, somanasa, domanasa, in that case, the sukha and dukkha are more kind of like on the physical side, and the somanasa, domanasa is more on the mental or emotional side. So domanasa is sorrow. You could say like depression or all kind of mental suffering is somanasa. So for the lay sadness or the householder sadness, there are the sights, the same sights as before. They're likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasing, connected with the world's material delights. And then sadness arises when you regard it as a loss to lose such sights, or when you recollect sights that you formerly lost, that have passed, ceased, and perished. So that's having the idea that you owned it, or you had possession of it, and then you lost it. And then in the contrast, the renunciate sadness is when you have understood the impermanence of sights, their perishing, fading away, and cessation. You truly understand, through right understanding, that both formerly and now, all those sights are impermanent, suffering, and perishable. And then, seeing this sight, you give rise to yearning for the supreme liberations. And you think, oh, when will I enter and remain in the same dimension that the noble ones enter and remain in today? When you give rise to this yearning for the supreme liberation like this, a sadness arises because of yearning. And that's, so a monastic who has overcome being sad or depressed because of not owning any objects here in this world may still have this sorrow because of be dissatisfied with the present moment because they got a glimpse of awakening or enlightenment or the noble attainments, but they know that they're not yet there. They're still subjected to or the merry-go-round of human life. So that's called renunciate sadness. I'm going to do two more and then we're going to stop for discussion. Now we're going to come to the equanimity. The householder's equanimity. They're not mentioning the quality of the sight, just any kind of sight whatsoever. Equanimity arises for the unlearned, ordinary person, a foolish, ordinary person who has not overcome their limitations and results of deeds and is blind to the drawbacks. Such equanimity does not transcend the sight. This is called the householder's equanimity. In this case, it does seem that the Buddha is a little bit criticizing that householder. So the householder is grasping after the things that they possess. And sometimes they possess them, and sometimes they lose them. And they just know that, every cloud has a silver lining, or every clear blue sky has a cloud, and things go up and down, and it's just the way it is. And they just kind of go along, clinging to things that they're clinging to, and then when they lose something that they were clinging to before, they know that eventually they'll get over it, but it doesn't spark in them any kind of striving to find a solution to get out of this merry-go-round of gain and loss. So that's my understanding of the meaning of that. And then for the renunciate equanimity, again, it's based on further contemplation, awareness, full understanding, and fully gaining the three marks of existence, that everything that we can experience in samsara, based on the five senses, is impermanent, suffering, and perishable. And so then, because of seeing the danger in clinging to something which is imperishable, then they would have given up that clinging, or they would have given up that craving for something to be a possession. They would have given up, they would have seen the danger in identification and given up that identification. And because of that letting go, the mind goes more and more towards this experience of equanimity. I'll pause here for questions. Now, the next portion is having understood the householder's happiness, sadness, and equanimity, and the renunciate happiness, sadness, and equanimity, understanding how to use this to move along step by step and to overcome the states that are holding us back. Patipada.
I have a question, Ayya. Can you elaborate on the way to be equanimous about the death of a loved one?
Yes.
I struggle with this because I've lost everyone in my family and I now have just one brother alive. COVID has devastated my family and I struggle with this. So if you can give me some guidance, I would appreciate it.
Well, first of all, we can see that it's only natural from the time that we were little. Our very idea of reality and our very idea of ourself was seeing ourselves within the constellation of the immediate family members. So being the child of my parents, the sister of my brothers, the sister of my sisters, the spouse of my spouse, the parent of my children, I kind of am located with all of these relationships and these connections. And there's a sort of a reflection coming back from all those people that has to do with like my world, my reality. And we very often don't see that process. So then when a loved one is taken away, especially if it's out of sequence, like if you're a parent and you lose a small child, and it's not, you don't expect it to happen in that order, then there is an actual shock. It's a trauma because it's a shock which is unexpected. And then again, the kind of happiness that we got because of our love and care for our loved ones, even if they were, like something unpleasant, like, you had to care for your relative while they were ill. And so their illness was gross and disgusting, but your love for them was so strong that it's like a very strong, beautiful, positive thing in that relationship. And then that love is cut off and torn away. And even if you will have told yourself everything is impermanent, like regarding your own child, or regarding your own parent, or your own spouse, or your own relative, to say, uninvited he came, uninvited they're going to go away. Why should I grieve when they're gone? You could kind of talk yourself into it like that, but it is in the nature of sentient beings or social animals, such as a human, to have attachment to the ones we love. And so that's a break. The comfort is that as time goes by, the painful feeling associated with the thought of one's loved one will gradually become less painful. And the pleasant thought of the things that were dear and lovable about your loved one may not fade away, they may be sustained. So it could be that someone who lost a relative this year, every time they think about that relative, the tears would come and they would be sad. But then after a few years, when they think of that loved one, a great smile comes to their face and they just have like laughter, thinking, oh, they were so funny. Oh, something about them that was joyful. And so that's an aspect of that. But I think in the end, it is possible to be more or less equanimous towards the death of one's loved ones, depending on how you have prepared yourself and how they have prepared themselves for that final break, that separation. Damon.
Thank you.
Yes, again, I'm following up with Rachel, and I think we can really empathize with your loss, because many of us have gone through at least some kind of loss. But isn't it the case that the suffering comes not directly from the person going out of the world that you grieve for, but the suffering comes from your relationship to the thoughts and feelings that are cascading over you, and therefore the relief comes from changing your relationship to those feelings and thoughts and emotions that you're having.
Yes, and ultimately, what we believe in the Dhamma is that any kind of identification will be a cause for suffering. Any kind of clinging and craving will be a cause for suffering. And so we are moving towards a state where, even in connection to our family, our loved ones, or close people, or other things that are inherently lovable, we are relating to them in a way which is actually quite detached, and which has a quality of freedom, a quality of letting go. If we are loving them, it's like we love them, instead of loving them with a grasped fist, we love them with an open hand. They can go at any time. Okay, Maureen?
I've always thought that impermanence got a bad rap, because it's impermanence that allows us to change and adapt and see things from different perspectives that are helpful to us. Even with the loss of a loved one. So I think that impermanence is, if everything was permanently like that, you really are stuck. But anyway, that was just my thought.
This is why the renunciate happiness is based on the perception of impermanence, and then you feel happy because it's impermanent. I want to come back to the sutta now.
Aya, would you mind showing the and renunciate sadness again? That part I
Yes,
get.
the renunciate sadness is you become disillusioned with this world, like the samsara world, because you see how everything is fading away and ceasing. But you have not yet gained the noble breakthrough, the opening the Dhamma eye, or the achieving of Nibbana, or the noble attainments. Perhaps the Dhamma eye is opened and you've got stream entry, but you've not attained the further stages of awakening. And then being in betwixt and between, one is disappointed with this world, disillusioned or disenchanted with this world, but you've not yet become stabilized in the noble awakening. And so there's a yearning, a longing, a frustration, perhaps even an anxiety, saying, oh, when am I going to be able to have this breakthrough to a noble realization? And then a person
Aya.
could even torture themselves because they think, oh, I've been eating alms food for an entire 2 years and I'm still not enlightened. I feel so ashamed of myself. How can I possibly eat alms food anymore unless I become enlightened? Or just having encountered persons who have what we long for, and then seeing how we have so many internal negativities, and say, oh, when am I going to be free from these emotional reactions? When am I going to have that kind of wisdom? When am I going to have the real joy and freedom that I see in those noble teachers who've got those qualities? And so then the monastic has to be quite careful not to hurt their practice by punishing themselves while they're not yet reached the goal. The next section is called Relying on This, Give Up That. Okay, by relying on renunciate happiness, give up and go beyond a householder's happiness. By relying on renunciate sadness, give up and go beyond the householder's sadness. By relying on renunciate equanimity, give up and go beyond the householder's equanimity. So instead of grasping onto some sensual pleasure, or instead of getting lost in daydreaming about sensual pleasures, focus the mind on impermanence and direct the mind towards the happiness of freedom that we get from letting go of that which is impermanent. Instead of being in grief about what we had before that got lost, instead, again, contemplate impermanence and practice letting go and experience the release from dukkha that can happen when we let go. So as long as we were clinging to something that was impossible to cling to because it's impermanent, to that extent that we were clinging to it, we suffered, we felt pain, we felt anxiety, all kinds of negativities. But the minute we're able to let go, we're free. The pain has stopped. And so that's using that contemplation to go beyond the householder's sadness. And then I guess the renunciate sadness would be the energy to strive for awakening. And then relying on renunciate equanimity, give up and go beyond the householder's equanimity. It's said elsewhere earlier on, I mentioned that neutral feeling, neutral experiences are the large majority of all the experiences we have in a day. If you had a feeling meter that was clicking off every 10 seconds, saying what's the feeling that's happening now every 10 seconds for the entire day, you would see that 80% of the time it's neutral. Only a minority of the time is it clearly pleasant or unpleasant. So instead of just being oblivious or not inquiring, not looking at the things which are neutral, instead the renunciate practice is to train our mind to pay attention, giving equal attention to each moment and giving very clear attention to the neutral things and seeing that, oh, they also have that same quality of impermanence. So that's the first three. And then the next two are by relying on renunciate happiness, give up and go beyond renunciate sadness. So stop criticizing yourself for what you didn't attain, but just do the work and experience the release from letting go from what is impermanent, the relief from not trying to hold on to what you don't own, the freedom of not being identified in that way. And then the next one, by relying on renunciate equanimity, give up and go beyond renunciate happiness. So this is really, I think, the most powerful heart of this sutta. Patipada mentioned at the beginning, staying in the present moment as a way to get away from either being in pain because of attachment or else getting lost in concepts and proliferations and history and all the kind of things, by just training the mind to stay in the present moment. But then this is suggesting if you can recognize in yourself that these patterns are happening, and if you can recall how they fit into this particular sutta, then instead of trying to go from something to nothing, you can go in a stepwise way. Go from your householder happiness to renunciate happiness, from householder sadness to renunciate sadness, and so forth like that. So it's just this same way that sometimes if a person is overwhelmed with a resentment or a grudge, and you tell them, oh, practice loving kindness towards that person towards whom you have the grudge, it may be a step too far to go from a really serious grudge over to loving kindness. You've got to have some way to go step by step, to step down, step down, step down, step down. So that evil person against whom you have the grudge, say, they might have some nice qualities. And so you could, sort of see them as being a mixture and develop some appreciation for the nice qualities and different things, different tricks, or even don't think about them for a while. Think about somebody who's lovable. And then you kind of get this, the endorphins are going in your body by the happy feeling of loving the lovable person in your mind. And then without thinking about the qualities of that person towards whom you have the grudge, you can take that same loving feeling and just put it over to the other individual. Different ways like that. So this is kind of, it is a kind of a stepwise way of coming up as far as this renunciate equanimity. And then we can go even further beyond that. When we have equanimity, we may, in meditation, come to experience equanimity based on diversity. The diversity is all the different kind of contexts that can happen. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, all those different material contexts. And you can be, one by one, you're equanimous toward each one of them, okay? But then, if you can turn the mind towards what's called equanimity based on unity, that is samadhi. That's the ekaggata that we spoke of this morning, the unification of the mind in practicing the first four jhanas, the fine material jhanas. So then, when the mind becomes unified in that way, you have lost interest in the tasty things or the sweet smelling things and all that, because the mind has become absorbed into the happy enjoyment of the unification of the mind. And then you can even go beyond that. Even the equanimity that you're experiencing based on the unification of the mind, you can go on to the other, what's called immaterial attainments, which are, and I'm really keeping in mind, Richard said something very useful the other day, not to think of them as being for further kinds of meditation, but as being some further things that could be arise within a context of the fourth jhana. But so even the unification of mind, or the bliss, the feelings that we have in jhana, when those objects drop away, we go to these more abstract kinds of meditations on infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception. Then that's a way of stepping beyond and refining it even further. And then lastly, it's saying relying on non-identification, give up equanimity based on unity. This non-identification is attamayata, which is not ta, maya, ta. So that made of that, tamaya means that made of that. Attamaya means that not made of that. So according to the commentary, this experience that it's not made of that is the insight immediately preceding the arising of the supramundane path. So if you are able to, within this unity, this is the ekaggata, the unification of the mind that we can experience in samadhi. And the equanimity aspect of that, then this is creating the space where it could be possible to have this arising of this non-identification, this anattamaya, which would be bringing you right up to the gate of awakening. I've usefully run out of time just before I got to the frustrating part of this sutta that seems like it's finished. Why do they have to go on and on with this other material? When the Buddha teaches the Dhamma, if the disciples don't want to listen, he's not displeased, he doesn't feel displeasure, he's unaffected. If some of the students listen and other students don't listen, he's not displeased and not pleased. He's equanimous. He remains the same. He remains mindful and aware. And if the disciples do want to listen, he doesn't feel pleased, he doesn't feel pleasure. He doesn't become elated because the disciples are listening to him. He is unaffected, mindful, and aware. And then the last part of the sutta is 8 directions, which I will not discuss, but it's referring to the 8 liberations, which are profound, free, heavenly, amazing, blissful experiences that can happen within meditation, which could even feel like enlightenment, but they're not necessarily enlightenment, but they are powerful in sort of like cleaning the hard drive and wiping out a lot of habits of attachment, because they had such a amazing experience of freedom, different aspects of freedom. And then with each of these, no matter what they are, when you see that it's just a sankhara, just something that's arising because of causes and conditions, don't cling to that one either, and become more and more equanimous. So I shall stop here, stop the share, and invite final comments. I apologize, we're a little bit over the time, but as long as you are happy to stay with me, I'm happy to speak with you and hear your comments and questions. I want to read here, Leilani. When one has lost their loved one, can think of that person who passed away, now has a new life and not suffering with illness anymore. We hope so. To be happy with the thought that they're not enduring worldly suffering anymore. Do I agree? It's possible. They might be in a place where they're not enduring worldly suffering. I always give blessings for those who've passed away, wishing that if not in the very next lifetime, that they will not be far away from a chance to hear the Dhamma and to obtain the full liberation, so they can really and truly be out of danger without any possibility of reverting to a painful realm again in the future. Yeah. Okay, Daniel?
I'm wondering about how neutral feeling plays into the description of lay equanimity, because in the sutta, it didn't seem clearly defined to me what lay equanimity really is. And I'm wondering if lay equanimity can exist with a pleasurable and displeasurable experiences.
I don't think it's very well expressed in the sutta according to the way I understand it. I believe that at least humans and probably other animals are able to, in a certain way, get used to anything. So even somebody who's living in an unjust society, living in a cruel situation, being persecuted and abused, they kind of can get used to it, and they can sort of like numb themselves out as a way of being able to live. So that's like a kind of equanimity, but it's not a fruitful kind of equanimity. It's just being numbed out because it's easier that way. And they definitely have not seen the danger So basically taking a neutral experience, you don't have to think about it, and then you don't have the opportunity to develop the wisdom about it because you're not really trying to look into it to develop wisdom. You're just kind of like numbed out. Yeah, it's a way of coping. But then the renunciate is paying attention to the neutral experiences just as much. And very often, sometimes people have the experience that when they really look, it's difficult to find something that's really neutral because everything has got a little bit of a valence one way or the other. Or it can seem to be very like shifty about those three categories of experience. But the main thing is that if you look and investigate, then you have a chance to find the wisdom by seeing the true nature of these experiences as they are. Now, I want to come to other people have put their hands down even while we were talking. So I'm going to assume that Ren and then Richard would like to add something.
Thank you, Ayya. I am trying to grasp, which probably very presumptuous, but I'm trying to grasp what the last stage of equanimity, which is non-identification. And I was looking at my note for samadhi, which is the stage before that. It says based on dimensions, which is based on dimensions of infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, which I assume also emptiness perhaps, and neither perception or non-perception. So to me, it feels like there's nothing to point at, you know? So if I understood that to be that, then my problem is understanding what non-identification is, which is the next stage, which is the gate to nirvana. Because I don't know what the distinction between those two.
The unification of the mind, ekaggata, is one of the factors of sama samadhi, which is very pleasant, and that's the factor that could be what they're pointing to as the unity. Samadhi and unity can have the aspect of being blissful, and one can identify with it. Even the immaterial attainments, if you experience the realm of neither perception or non-perception and were, completely cut off from worldly experience for 8 days while you were in this profound meditation, and then you come out afterwards, then I think I should interview you for that magazine called What is Enlightenment? Or maybe we could take out a full-page ad and say, here's so-and-so, and they must be enlightened because they can experience that realm. So it's possible, like anything that we can experience will be possible afterwards to build up some kind of a papancha or some kind of identification from it. But what the sutta is saying is it's by non-identification that we turn towards awakening. That's my understanding of that.
So if I understand your explanation, I think I can distinctly make a note on that, which is identification is that if we don't have a sense of ourselves in it,
Yes.
that state of samadhi is still the same, but it's not me experiencing it. It's not anyone experiencing it. That's the distinction between these two then?
Yes.
That's what non-identification means, right?
Yes, not
Okay,
putting
thank
the
you.
self into it.
Got it. Beautiful.
Richard?
Thank you. I just want to address a couple of things. Going beyond, unity and diversity. That's the fifth formless realm. That's why it's not mentioned here. Only the other four are mentioned. So when one is able to attain that, it has that profound effect on the mind of Ceto Vimukti, And if one can then make a slight transition beyond that, one can attain panna vimukti. So it's that Buddha's encouraging you to, even go beyond that, because the realms are divided into, the physical realm of elements and everything, which includes the lower heavens, and then the formless realms, which is unity. So the lower realms of diversity, the realms in the formless world are unity, but this is like even going beyond that type of conception. So that's one point I wanted to make, but no one has to accept that. You can research and think about it yourself. And householder unity is it's kind of like the story about the fox and the grapes. Oh, those grapes were probably sour anyways. So instead of being tenaciously trying to, he okay, he wanders off, but he still wants grapes. He still wants tasty grapes, but he just gives up on those because he couldn't get them. Or there's always more fish in the sea, right? So you want to have a relationship with somebody, it doesn't work out. So you calm your mind down. Oh, there's more fish in the, but you still want fish in the sea. You know what I mean? So that's why Buddha is saying it's still based on sensual desire and sensual. You're kind of getting a sort of equanimity in the mind, but it's still underlying based on some kind of sensual desire. And the other one, the Buddha's three foundations. The first two, it says the Buddha is not satisfied. You know what I mean? But it doesn't affect him. It doesn't cause any But the third one, it says he is satisfied, but he still has presence of mind and equanimity that he doesn't become overwhelmed by it. He doesn't jump up screaming and yelling, oh, wow, one of my disciples became an arahant or a stream enterer or something, No, he's satisfied and happy that they've understood his teaching and made progress, right? But he doesn't go kind of crazy the way a worldly person might go, right? He maintains that equanimity of mind, you might say. Anyways, those are just the 3 points I want to make. Thank you.
Thank you for that correction. I think I was losing the thread a little bit in that third case where all the students listened. Damon?
Is it implied in this teaching that the way to see things as they really are is still through the senses, but by using awareness, one's kind of Buddha awareness allows us to make proper use of our senses? The one that knows,
Mhm.
the part of us that knows that
Right.
is kind of always there in the background that we're trying to develop here.
Definitely still through the senses. And I would say without identification or attachment.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So what one more thing. What is this awareness? Is it in contrast to the other aggregates that are unreliable?
By awareness in this context, I guess I'm referring to vijnana, or the consciousness which is cognizing the experiences. There's different words and vocabulary in the Pali that is sometimes translated as awareness, is like what you are paying attention to. So if you direct your awareness to watching the breath, then there's two things that have happened. One is that the consciousness, or the faculty of being able to cognize, is capable of cognizing the breath. And there's also something that's happening that's a sankhara, or a choice, that the mind is directed towards putting attention in that direction. And then even how the factor of awareness would have several other like traits or mental characteristics that are coming up together at the same time. So you could have awareness with anger or awareness that was free from anger. You could have
Good.
awareness with greed or awareness that was free from greed, and like that. So it's having the awareness which is clear and free from the negative traits.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But definitely, we got senses. That's what we were born with, senses. We can't do it any other way because that's all we have. Okay. This may be enough. And I'm going to invite all of us to give respect to the Triple Gem. And I'm inviting Patipada to stay on for a few minutes afterwards. Araham Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantam Abhivademi Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipando Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Okay, thank you everybody for your patience.
Thank you, Ayya.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ayya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ayya. It was very helpful.
Indeed. Thank you.
Ayya, what I wanted to talk to you about was
To see if the others are departing. Okay.
I wanted to know how I can be helpful from afar. Now that I'm retired, I have time. And if there are some things that I can do online for the monastery, I would like to be able to help in whatever way I can in a remote way, so that even if I'm traveling, I can log in to get some things done for the monastery. If you can give that some thought, and maybe we can set up some time to talk.
Let me ask you about a particular project that
Okay.
has been waiting for a person to arise.
Okay.
This spring, I had given the retreat on practicing for the destruction of the taints.
Yes.
Did you attend that retreat?
No, only not the whole thing. No,
So
because I was in Cairo.
Maureen attended the retreat, and she was so happy with it that she offered a donation to publish it as a booklet if we could get the talks written up and edited.
Oh,
And I know that if you open them in the YouTube, you can cause the YouTube to
to
produce,
generate a script.
they can generate the script.
Yeah,
But of course, it'll have a lot of gobbledygook because YouTube doesn't know
of
potty.
course. Right.
I was wondering if this is a project that you might be interested in, to try to produce a draft of a script of the talks from that retreat.
Yeah, that would be something I can easily do from anywhere.
Yes, you can.
So maybe maybe it would be helpful if I can come next Sunday, and I would need a little bit of tutoring on YouTube, because I don't use YouTube very, I view, but that's it.
Uh-huh.
And so to be able to understand from someone who knows how,
Right.
if I can get a little tutoring, that would probably be helpful to me
Right.
so I can work on it whether I'm here or not.
Well, I'll be here this weekend, this coming weekend, so that would be.
Okay, then let me,
Oh, wait a
is it
minute.
okay for
So
me to come on Saturday and stay overnight for Sunday
Yes.
in the yurt maybe?
Now, on Saturday, we're having a day-long program that is going from 8:30 a.m. until 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay,
So we could have our meeting in the evening on
or on
Saturday,
Sunday,
or else on Sunday afternoon following the
Right.
Sunday program.
right, right. And I can even stay Saturday, Sunday, Monday. You know, however long is allowable to be able to learn the process of the
I
YouTube.
just need to, I'm pretty sure, I'm 88% sure that we will have room for you to stay overnight as long as you like, but I need to check on that.
Okay, okay. And the yurt is lovely. Even if it's hot, I really don't mind once the fan is on.
Right. Okay. Very good.
Okay, so I will see you next Saturday.
Yeah.
And I will wait to get an email from you about duration.
Very good. Perfect.
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Ayya.
Right. Bye-bye.